Fight Night Champion is almost 14 years old. UFC Undisputed 3 is almost 13 years old. UFC 5, although a good game, is not a very good MMA sim and didn't do a good enough job separating itself from UFC 4. And so because of that, it is currently dead. And what about Undisputed Boxing, the so-called greatest boxing sim ever made? Well, that game is dead too. This is the reality of being a fan of simulation hand-to-hand combat games. Now, this video is part 2 of another video I uploaded a couple days ago titled How Martial Arts Ruined Gaming for Me. What I'm trying to do here is just echo the frustration I'm sure that other players like me experience just for being fans of this genre. So why is it painful being a fan of hand-to-hand combat sims? Well, the first problem is that simulation combat gaming is a very small and niche genre. Sure, boxing has been around since like 3000 BCE and MMA has been around since pancreation, but compared to other genres of gaming like shooters, RPGs, or open world games, sim combat games appeal to a smaller, more specific audience. And because of that, well-established game development studios typically don't have much interest in making these games. At least not until someone else does and they see tangible proof that they could potentially make profit on their investment. We saw this with EA and the UFC initially. At first, EA Sports wanted nothing to do with MMA games. When the UFC approached him to develop a video game, EA declined, reportedly saying, "You're not a real sport. We wouldn't touch this thing. We want nothing to do with this." And it wasn't until after the UFC partnered with THQ to develop their video games that EA decided to make EA Sports MMA in 2010, which was then followed by securing the UFC license to develop subsequent titles in the EA Sports UFC series. Go figure. But even then, when a big studio like EA decides to tackle the genre, they're often unwilling to allocate the kind of budget that's necessary to create the product that we deserve. Instead of treating these games as flagship projects, they're often treated as side ventures, if you will, something to just churn out quickly to meet a schedule. A lot of these games become yearly releases, which thank goodness the UFC series hasn't turned into just yet. And this leads to games that just feel unpolished, outdated, or lacking the depth needed to really immerse players. So that's the first problem we have as fans of this genre. The second issue is that the sport we love is extremely complicated, let's just be honest. Hand-to-hand combat sports like MMA, boxing, jiu-jitsu, or kickboxing are incredibly intricate. They involve layers of techniques, strategies, and mechanics that are difficult to replicate in a game. I mean, take MMA for example. MMA is not just one sport. It is a fusion of many, including boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, judo, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu, amongst others. Each of these martial arts is intricate enough to be a standalone video game. Combining them into a single cohesive experience is an incredibly ambitious challenge for any developer, especially when the goal is simulation. Developing systems that accurately capture this complexity is daunting, and for such a specific and niche genre, it's completely understandable that a developer might look at it and kind of see that maybe it's not really worth the effort. After all, why pour years into developing a deep, realistic MMA sim when the potential sales might not justify the investment? Now, personally, this annoys me, especially because we live in a world where we've got shit like farming simulator, fishing simulator, and even truck driving simulators. And yet, there are no dedicated games for K1 kickboxing, pure wrestling, jiu-jitsu, or judo. It's kind of insane to think about that. These are globally practiced sports with rich histories and passionate fan bases. But again, as annoying as it might be for me, making a fishing simulator or a trucking simulator or whatever is far easier than trying to make a boxing sim or a kickboxing sim. There are just way too many moving parts in a hand-to-hand combat sim, especially when grappling becomes involved. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the issue of monopolies. When one company has a monopoly on a genre, it creates a lack of competition. And when there is no competition, there's no incentive to innovate or go above and beyond. Look at EA Sports UFC for example. In 2012, EA Sports secured a multi-year, multi-product licensing agreement with the UFC, taken over from the THQ. In 2020, EA and the UFC announced a 10-year expansion of that partnership, ensuring EA's exclusive rights to develop UFC-branded video games through 2030. This means that unless something fucking crazy happens and that contract is broken somehow, EA is the only company that will touch UFC games till 2030. Now, personally, I'm not complaining about this because unless THQ somehow magically comes back to developing MMA games, there's really no other company I can trust to make a better UFC product. But with no other companies making MMA games at this level, you can kind of see why it would be fair to assume that EA doesn't feel the need to push boundaries. They're content making small incremental changes rather than delivering groundbreaking experiences. Because there's no competition, mediocrity becomes a standard. Again, I use the word mediocrity, not terrible or dumpster fire or dumpster juice or whatever the fuck y'all like to say. I pick my words very carefully. These are not terrible games. They're mediocre MMA sims. To put it bluntly, there is no one else out there stealing their sales with a better product. And that's a problem that we're going to have for a very long time, unfortunately. The last problem is that there's an issue of passion versus competence. To build a great simulation combat game, developers need both. You need passion to study the sport enough to understand it deeply, but you also need competence to transform all that knowledge into a fun, balanced, and mechanically sound video game. All too often we see developers with a lot of passion, but not good enough technical expertise to actually pull off that passion they have. A game like Undisputed Boxing comes to mind. It's obvious that these guys have a lot of passion for the sport of boxing, and it's clear what their vision was. But if we are to be fucking blunt and honest, it's also clear that there's a serious lack of competence somewhere when it comes to bringing their vision to life in a way that actually works. On the other side of the coin is that sometimes we see teams with the technical know-how and competence to bring a vision to life, but then when you look at the product, it's also clear there's a lack of passion somewhere, at least at a level that becomes noticeable, aka the EA Sports UFC series. Getting both of these elements to align is very, very rare, and the one time I think we saw these elements align was with UFC Undisputed 3. To this day, I can't think of a better MMA sim, and even though that game had a lot of flaws, it was obvious it was designed by both competent and passionate developers. Now, despite all these challenges, there is one undeniable fact. The demand for great simulation combat games is there. Look at Undisputed Boxing. That game sold 1 million copies in a week. 1 million fucking copies, bro. That's not just a fluke. It's proof that players are hungry for these kinds of games. Players were so hungry for a new boxing game that Undisputed actually suffered from toxic positivity. Players were so hesitant to say anything negative about it. They'll say shit like, bro, this is the only boxing game we have, bro. You gotta slow down with the critiques, bro. It was wild to witness. And to an extent, I can't really blame these folks. The last boxing game we got was Fight Night Champion 13 years ago. Dude, I was 18 years old when that game first dropped. I'm 32 now. There's a huge audience out there, man, just waiting for someone to step up and deliver a product worthy of their passion. And when I say a huge audience, I don't mean a huge audience compared to massive games. I mean a huge audience in this niche. Developers just need to be willing to take the leap of faith and give this genre the attention it deserves. Hell, if the thought of simulation is too daunting, why not just focus on making a game that is just fun? A game that is not exactly a simulation, but still represents the sport in a fun way. Think about games like NBA Street or FIFA Street. These games weren't hyper-realistic, but they were incredibly fun and still captured the essence of basketball and soccer. What about a game like Def Jam? Again, not hyper-realistic at all, but I've heard so many good things about that game. People loved it. If another combat sports equivalent to this is made, a game that balances authenticity with fun, it could open up the genre to a wider audience while alleviating some of the pressures that comes with trying to create a game that is strictly realism. So why does any of this matter? For me, it matters because these games actually do something incredible that goes way beyond just creating entertainment for those that play it. They help gamers become lifelong fans of the sport itself. Take UFC Undisputed 3 for example. That game featured Pride Mode, which brought the iconic Pride FC organization into the virtual world, complete with its unique rule sets, entrances, and legendary fighters. It also included the Ultimate Fight mode, where players could relive or rewrite historic MMA moments, complete with real-life context and cutscenes. Additionally, the game allowed players to unlock fighter stories and cutscenes using points earned in the game, providing insight into the fighters' backgrounds. Tutorials and practice modes educated players on various martial arts techniques, strategies, and the intricacies of the sport. These features not only immersed players but also taught them about the real-world history and culture of MMA. For many people, this was their entry point into the sport, and it's a big reason why they became lifelong fans. I believe the same thing could happen with other sport games. Imagine a high-quality jiu-jitsu game that teaches players about grappling positions, submissions, and strategies. A game that will introduce players to legends like Gordon Ryan, Marcelo Garcia, Roger Gracie, Andre Galvao. It could help catapult jiu-jitsu into the mainstream, which is what jiu-jitsu has been trying to do for fucking years. The same goes for wrestling, judo, or K1. A well-made game could elevate these sports, educate fans, and grow their fan bases. And it's not just about individual sports. I would really love to see other MMA organizations step up and try to create their own games. Like, why is the UFC the only one with a game right now? We've got Bellator, ONE FC, PFL. They all have the potential to create something unique and also expand the genre, and I think they should be doing that. You got to be trying to create your own games as well. Having EA Sports UFC, you don't think that is a way that the UFC brand grows? Having people play their video game? Like, if you want Bellator, ONE FC, PFL, and all this stuff to be more popular, maybe consider having someone make a video game for you guys, in my opinion. Being a fan of simulation combat games is not easy, bro. It's tough, but it's a genre that's worth fighting for. It's a passion that we all have. And I already talked about why it matters, why I believe that they should put more effort into it. Because right now, as it stands, what we have is just not it. It's either the games are old as hell, or the games don't actually meet what we want. They're not actual sims. And hell, like I said, if you can't create sim, if that is too daunting, then do something else. Make it stylistic, make it fun. But we need better games, man. We need better games to represent the sports that we enjoy. And that's really all I came here to say today. You guys give me your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree? Does my sentiment echo the same as yours? Let me know. And I'll see you guys later with a brand new one. As always, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Peace out. Have a good one.